Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene rose to national prominence as one of the most vocal backers of President Donald Trump. But the pair fell out, dramatically and publicly, after she called for the extension of expiring health care subsidies and fought for the release of the Epstein files over his objections. She prevailed in the latter fight, but has announced that she'll be resigning in early January. Marjorie Taylor Greene joins us now from her office on Capitol Hill. Congresswoman, welcome to the NewsHour. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Can we just begin with some of the news today, which, as you know, is President Trump kicking off what the White House says is going to be a series of events talking about affordability. I know you broke with the president, sided with the Democrats on this issue, specifically as it relates to health care costs during the shutdown. But I have to ask, you've seen the polling, you've seen how Americans are looking at this. Do you think the president has lost the Americans' trust on this core issue of affordability?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Adam is here. So what just happened? Marjorie Taylor Greene was Trump's most loyal defender through every impeachment, raid, and indictment, so devoted that he publicly called her his favorite House Republican. They seemed politically inseparable, and now something has happened to shatter that. That version of reality is dead. It has been incinerated, and the smoke is still rising over Washington as we speak. Fast forward to the present moment, and I am telling you with absolute certainty that Marjorie Taylor Greene has not merely drifted away from Trump.
And a telling sign of just how far-reaching the criticism of the president has become, my first two sources are talking about the idea of working together. Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene, I have to ask you if you believe that the president thought he was depicting himself as a doctor, not Jesus, in that post.
No, absolutely not. I thought that was blasphemy. As a Christian, I was very offended. And a doctor, President Trump is not a doctor. And that picture had him in a robe, as Jesus is often portrayed, with light coming out of his hands. And he talked about healing people like a Red Cross worker. I think there would be many people that would argue with that, saving lives. So I think it was blasphemy. I was offended. I think he should apologize, not act defensive. And many Christians across America and the world were very offended by that.
She has turned on him with a ferocity that makes everything else happening in American politics look like a schoolyard squabble. We are not talking about mild disappointment or a politely worded difference of opinion. We are talking about threats to resign from Congress entirely. We are talking about public declarations that Trump is a liar and a traitor to the very movement she helped build. We are talking about a sitting United States representative with real institutional power, real influence over the MAGA base, and a real platform that reaches millions of eyeballs, standing up and essentially declaring war on the man she once defended with every fiber of her being.
The conversation needs to be had, and he's out of control, and people within the administration need to step up, take responsibility, and rein this in.
A message from someone who was long a staunch supporter of the president, Marjorie Taylor Greene, now joining CNN's Situation Room, calling for the president to be removed from office under the 25th Amendment. That would require those closest to the president to determine if he is unfit for office and opt to remove him against his will. It comes as only a handful of ships have now made their way through the Strait of Hormuz since the fragile ceasefire with Iran started. The reopening of this critical waterway was a condition of that agreement.
This is not buried on page 16 of some newspaper nobody reads. This is a sitting member of Congress lighting a match and dropping it on a gasoline-soaked Republican Party. And the reason this matters far more than the average political food fight is simple. If Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people, has reached the breaking point, if she is publicly calling Donald Trump a betrayer of his own promises, then something profoundly dark and destabilizing is eating away at the guts of the MAGA movement right now. This is the beginning of a civil war that most of the mainstream press is either missing or deliberately ignoring, and by the time they catch up, the entire Republican coalition may already be in ruins. The roots of this implosion reach back into the final months of the previous year, when Donald Trump, acting on impulses that his own aides have since confirmed, ordered his political operation to destroy Marjorie Taylor Greene. Not to gently nudge her, not to have a private conversation, not to find some diplomatic off-ramp. He wanted her obliterated. He wanted her marginalized into irrelevance. He wanted her name to become synonymous with political failure, and he deployed the full machinery of his operation to make that happen. The crime that triggered this death sentence was not corruption or scandal in the traditional sense. It was that Greene had begun to criticize him. She had started to push back against his healthcare agenda, an agenda that she believed was betraying the very voters who had put him back in power. She had started demanding real transparency on the Epstein files, a demand that millions of Trump's own supporters considered sacred. And she had begun to call out his Iran war policies, policies that sounded less like the anti-war populism Trump had campaigned on, and more like the neoconservative adventurism that the MAGA base had been promised would never return. That was all it took. The moment she dared to hold him accountable to his own rhetoric, the love evaporated and was replaced by a cold, calculated campaign of destruction. The man who had once called her his favorite was now plotting her political extinction from the West Wing. The situation deteriorated with terrifying speed as the new year dawned. Greene did not back down in the face of the White House's hostility. She did not beg for forgiveness or grovel for her old position in the inner circle. Instead, she went on camera and delivered what can only be described as an ultimatum aimed directly at the most powerful man in the Republican Party. Standing in front of the press, she looked into the lenses and told Donald Trump in substance, if not in exact words, to stop being a bully or the Republican Party would lose the midterm elections in a catastrophic landslide. She did not pull this warning out of thin air. She cited hard polling data. She revealed that Trump's approval rating had cratered by a staggering 38 percentage points, a collapse that she directly attributed to his handling of the Epstein file situation. 38 points is not a statistical wobble. It is not a margin of error fluctuation. It is a free fall. It is the kind of number that keeps campaign strategists awake at night, staring at ceiling tiles and wondering if their entire political project is about to be swept away by a wave of voter disgust. And Greene's message was brutally clear. The Republican Party could not win if it remained divided, and unity was impossible as long as Trump continued to ignore the promises he had made about releasing the Epstein files, ending the march toward war with Iran, and actually fixing a healthcare system that was crushing working families. These were not fringe obsessions. These were the bedrock commitments that the MAGA base had been told were non-negotiable. The response from Trump was not a policy rebuttal. It was not a thoughtful engagement with her arguments. It was not even a strategic attempt to co-opt her concerns and neutralize the threat. Donald Trump, the former and perhaps future president, depending on how the electoral chips fall, stepped onto Air Force One, turned to the reporters gathered around him, and began calling her Marjorie Taylor Greene. He literally inserted the word traitor into her name and repeated it for the cameras as if he were a middle school bully inventing a cruel nickname for a classmate who had embarrassed him. The President of the United States, faced with substantive criticism from a sitting member of his own party, chose to respond with name-calling from the presidential aircraft. This is not statesmanship. This is not political hardball. This is the behavior of a man who senses his grip slipping and has no remaining tools except petty, vindictive cruelty. And the most disturbing dimension of this retaliation is that Greene has been facing genuine death threats throughout this entire saga, actual threats against her life from people who have been radicalized by the rhetoric swirling around this conflict. Instead of lowering the temperature, instead of telling his supporters to stand down, Trump escalated the attacks. He saw that one of his own allies was receiving death threats, and his instinct was to pour gasoline on the fire. What is actually driving this chaos beneath the surface-level drama is a collision over a handful of core promises that formed the very skeleton of Trump's political identity. The biggest of these, the one that ignited the entire powder keg, is the Epstein files. For years, stretching back through Trump's entire political resurgence, the MAGA base has been marinating in a deeply held conviction. They believe that Jeffrey Epstein's network of predation and corruption reaches into the highest echelons of Washington, Hollywood, Wall Street, and the global elite. They believe that locked away in government vaults and sealed court records is a client list, a flight log manifest, a web of documentation that would expose the powerful people who participated in or enabled Epstein's crimes. And they believe, with a faith that is almost religious in its intensity, that Donald Trump was the one man on earth willing and able to rip those files open and show the world the truth. They believe that his return to power would be followed almost immediately by declassification, by transparency, by the kind of cleansing fire that he had promised when he talked about draining the swamp. Greene believed it too. She believed it so completely that she attached her entire political credibility to the promise that Trump would deliver. And Trump has not delivered. In fact, according to reporting that has seeped out from multiple sources close to the administration, he is actively blocking the release. He is choosing secrecy over transparency. He is protecting the very people that his base wanted exposed. The question of why hangs over everything like a storm cloud. The answer, according to those who have followed the threads most closely, is that there are individuals in Trump's own orbit, people within his administration, people whose loyalty he values, who are connected to the Epstein network. And Trump would rather bury the evidence than risk implicating his associates. So the swamp remains undrained, the files remain locked, and the promise that was supposed to be the ultimate proof that Trump was different from every other politician has been broken. Greene sees this for what it is, and she has named it publicly as a betrayal of everything the movement claimed to represent. Then there is the healthcare disaster that is unfolding in slow motion, while everyone's attention is fixed on the more sensational elements of this feud. Trump campaigned relentlessly on protecting Social Security and Medicare. He stood before rally crowds of tens of thousands and swore that under his watch, no one would lose their benefits, no senior would be left behind, and the American healthcare system would finally be fixed in a way that served ordinary people rather than insurance executives and pharmaceutical conglomerates. These were not minor platform planks. They were central to his appeal among older voters, among working-class families, among everyone who had been crushed by medical debt and prescription drug costs that seemed designed by sadists. Greene's district in Georgia is filled with exactly these voters. People who depend on Social Security checks to buy groceries. People who would be bankrupted by a single hospital stay without Medicare. People who cast their ballots for Trump because they believed his promise to protect them. And now his administration is pushing policies that do the precise opposite. Cuts are being proposed. Benefits are being threatened. The pharmaceutical companies that Trump promised to take on are not being taken on. Greene is watching this happen in real time, and she is refusing to be silent about it. She is saying out loud what millions of Trump voters are feeling, but cannot articulate from a congressional podium. And Trump's response to her defense of his own campaign promises has been to call her a traitor and try to end her political career. The irony is so thick it could choke a horse. She is being punished for demanding that he keep the promises he made to his own voters. The foreign policy fracture is equally devastating because it cuts to the heart of Trump's identity as the anti-war candidate. He ran against the forever wars. He ridiculed the Bush-era neoconservatives who had drowned America in Middle Eastern quagmires. He promised to bring troops home, to stop spending trillions on military adventures that enriched defense contractors and left American soldiers in flag-draped coffins. That promise was one of the primary reasons he was able to build a coalition that included disaffected Democrats, anti-war independents, and libertarian-leaning voters who were sick of the bipartisan war consensus. Now, the machinery of war is grinding toward Iran. Pressure is coming from neoconservative voices inside his own administration. Pressure is coming from foreign allies who want American military power deployed against Tehran. Pressure is coming from a national security establishment that has never met a war it didn't want to escalate. And Trump, the man who was supposed to be immune to that pressure, appears to be bending. Greene sees the warning signs, and she is refusing to participate. She is voting against war measures. She is warning that endless war is not America first. It is America exhausted, America bled dry, America fighting conflicts that benefit no one except the merchants of death. And for this principled anti-war stance, Trump is trying to destroy her. This is the point where most outside observers fundamentally misunderstand what is happening. They look at the Trump-Greene conflict and they see a personality clash, two combustible egos colliding in a contest of who can generate more headlines. That interpretation is dangerously shallow. This is not about personality. This is about whether Donald Trump actually believes in anything he says, or whether his entire political career has been an extended improvisational performance designed to accumulate power for its own sake. Greene is forcing that question into the open in a way that cannot be dodged. Every time Trump attacks her rather than addressing her substantive criticisms, he provides more evidence that the performance theory is the correct one. Every time he calls her a traitor rather than explaining why the Epstein files remain sealed, he confirms the suspicion that he is hiding something. Every time his staff plots to recruit a primary challenger against her rather than engaging with her healthcare arguments, he demonstrates that loyalty to him personally is the only principle that matters. And the base is watching. Millions of people who invested their hopes and their identities in the Trump movement are watching one of his most loyal defenders get mauled for the crime of asking him to keep his promises. That is not sustainable. That is not a formula for political longevity. That is a slow-motion implosion playing out on the largest possible stage. The approval rating collapse that Greene cited is the canary in the coal mine. A 38-point drop tied specifically to the Epstein file betrayal is a blinking red emergency light that no competent political operation would ignore. It means that a massive segment of the coalition has reached the conclusion that Trump is not who he claimed to be. It means that the promise of transparency, the promise that separated him from the corrupt establishment he railed against, has been exposed as hollow. And if that promise was hollow, what else was hollow? The healthcare promises? The anti-war promises? The entire America First platform? Once that door of doubt is opened, it is almost impossible to close. Greene is not creating that doubt. She is giving voice to it. She is providing a permission structure for millions of disillusioned voters to admit what they already suspect, that they were played, that the man they trusted was not actually committed to the things they care about. And Trump's reaction, the attacks, the nicknames, the revenge plotting, only accelerates the disillusionment because it reveals a leader who cannot tolerate accountability, who surrounds himself with people connected to Epstein and then blocks transparency about Epstein, who demands total loyalty while offering nothing but broken promises in return. The political mechanics of what happens next are brutal for the Republican Party. Trump needs a unified caucus to pass legislation. He needs House members to vote for his priorities, to defend his record, to show up at rallies and generate enthusiasm. If Greene is leading a faction that refuses to rubber stamp his agenda, if she is voting against war measures and calling out healthcare betrayals and demanding Epstein transparency, then the legislative machinery seizes up. Bills fail. Agendas stall. The midterm elections approach with nothing to show voters except internal warfare and a trail of unfulfilled commitments. Republican candidates are forced to answer impossible questions. Do they side with Trump and defend the broken promises? Or do they side with Greene and risk being targeted by the Trump political machine? There is no safe option. There is no middle path. The party is being torn in half by a conflict that Trump himself created by choosing retaliation over reconciliation. Greene's threat to resign from Congress is the sleeper element of this story that deserves far more attention than it is receiving. A sitting representative does not casually float the possibility of walking away from power. That threat signals something profound. It signals that she has reached a point where her principles, whatever one thinks of them, are more important to her than her political career. She is essentially telling the world that she would rather leave Congress than continue to participate in a political project that has abandoned its own stated values. That posture contrasts sharply with Trump's approach, which is to cling to power at all costs and punish anyone who threatens his grip. Voters notice these contrasts. They notice when someone is willing to sacrifice for what they believe, and when someone is willing to destroy their own allies to avoid accountability. The longer this contrast plays out in public, the more damage it does to Trump's image as the leader of a principled movement. There is also the impeachment dimension hovering in the background, a possibility that gains plausibility with every new fracture in the Republican coalition. As Trump's approval numbers sink, as more Republicans like Greene publicly break ranks, as evidence accumulates that he is actively obstructing transparency on the Epstein files, the calculus for Democrats shifts. Impeachment is no longer a purely partisan exercise destined to fail in the Senate. If Greene and her allies refuse to defend Trump, if they vote with Democrats or even abstain, if they provide testimony or public support for investigations, then the political shield that has protected Trump through multiple previous scandals evaporates. A bipartisan impeachment coalition, even a small one, would fundamentally alter the power dynamics in Washington. And the legal exposure that Trump faces, already significant, becomes even more acute when his own party begins to fracture. Obstruction of Epstein transparency is not just a political problem, it is a potential legal liability. If Trump is blocking the release of documents that could implicate his associates, that is evidence of a cover-up. That is the kind of evidence that prosecutors can use. That is the kind of evidence that congressional investigators can build hearings around. The more Greene talks, the more other Republicans feel emboldened to talk, the deeper the legal jeopardy becomes. What we are witnessing is the unraveling of a political movement that once seemed invincible. The MAGA coalition was built on a foundation of promises: drain the swamp, release the Epstein files, protect Social Security and Medicare, end the forever wars, put America first. Those promises were the glue that held together a disparate collection of evangelical conservatives, working-class populists, anti-war activists, conspiracy theorists, and disaffected Democrats. The glue is dissolving because the promises are not being kept. Greene is not the cause of the dissolution. She is the most visible symptom. She is the warning bell that cannot be unrung. And Trump, instead of racing to repair the damage by actually delivering on his commitments, is trying to silence the warning bell with slander and political retaliation. That strategy never works. It didn't work for any leader in history who tried it, from crumbling empires to collapsing corporations. Attacking the messenger does not change the message. It only proves that the messenger was right to be concerned. The street-level impact of this civil war is already being felt in ways that will only intensify as the midterm elections draw closer. Voter enthusiasm is a fragile resource. It cannot be manufactured on demand, and it cannot survive sustained betrayal. The voters who stood in the rain for hours at Trump rallies, who flew flags from their pickup trucks, who donated small dollar amounts they could barely afford, are now being asked to do it again while their own champion is calling one of their favorite representatives a traitor for demanding that he keep his word. That is not a motivational message. That is a depressant. It makes people want to stay home. It makes people wonder if the whole thing was a grift from the beginning. And depressed turnout is electoral poison. It doesn't just hurt Trump. It hurts every Republican running on the same ballot, from gubernatorial candidates to school board races. The midterms become a referendum not on Democratic policies, but on whether the Republican Party is capable of governing itself, let alone the country. The events that are about to unfold will define the next phase of American politics with a clarity that is rare in an era of muddled information and spin. If Greene survives Trump's retaliation, if she keeps her seat and keeps speaking out and keeps demanding accountability, she becomes a model for other Republicans who have been privately nursing the same doubts. The dam breaks. More voices join the chorus. The coalition fractures into warring camps, and Trump's ability to command the party dissolves. If Greene is destroyed, if Trump's political machine succeeds in ending her career, the message to the rest of the party is even darker. Fall in line or be erased. Question nothing. Accept every broken promise in silence. And that message will drive away the very voters who made the movement powerful in the first place, the ones who believed Trump was different, the ones who thought they were part of something more than a personality cult. Either way, the damage is done. The illusion of invincibility is shattered. The cracks are visible and growing, and the woman who was once Trump's most reliable defender is now holding the hammer that is widening those cracks with every public statement she makes. This is the moment historians will mark. Not the end of Trump's relevance, not necessarily the end of his political career, but the end of the idea that his movement was an unbreakable monolith, immune to the pressures that fracture every political coalition eventually. The pressures are real. The promises were real. The betrayals, if Greene is to be believed, and the polling suggests millions believe her, are real. What remains to be seen is whether anything can be salvaged from the wreckage, or whether the entire MAGA project is destined to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. Keep your eyes fixed on this story because the next chapter is being written in real time, and the outcome will ripple through American politics for years to come. The Civil War is no longer coming, it is already here, and Marjorie Taylor Greene has chosen her side. She has chosen the promises over the man, and that choice may prove more decisive than anyone yet understands.